I used to think that most of the mistakes people make happen because they are careless or reckless or simply do not care about the consequences. That night proved something different. Sometimes the worst mistakes come from being exhausted and scared and trying to hold together a life that is already splitting at the seams. I had promised my mother's doctor that I would never leave her alone after sunset again. Early dementia does not wait for a convenient moment to get worse. It does not give warnings or grace. It creeps up on you the way twilight creeps across a field slow and quiet until you realize you can barely see your own hands. Leaving her alone even for a short time was breaking the one rule every caregiver knows by heart. But that evening, I had no choice, or at least that is what I told myself. The notice from the county office was still burned into my mind. A new filing from Dane Marston's company, another step toward seizing a piece of my land to expand his development project. I could not fight him with emotion or memory or fairness. I needed paperwork signatures proof that the land was mine outright. My lawyer insisted I come in person before the weekend, so I tucked my mother into bed, whispered that I would only be gone for a short while, and prayed she would sleep through the night. A guilty prayer rarely holds weight, and I knew it. The sky had already begun to darken as I drove into town. By the time I left the lawyer's office, it was raining, the kind of cold, relentless rain that made the asphalt shine like black glass. Every instinct told me to take the main road home. Every ounce of fear about losing the ranch urged me to take the shortcut that cut 20 minutes from the trip. The sign that blocked the mountain road was hard to miss. A bright white board with bold letters that read, "Road closed ahead." I stopped there for a moment and listened to the sound of the rain hammering the truck roof. I could still turn around. I could still follow the rules. But worry can be louder than reason. I eased forward, swung the wheel, and crossed the boundary as if no one would ever know. The farther I climbed, the worse the visibility became. Rain thickened to sheets. Wind shoved the truck from the side. The road curved sharply along the ridge, and I found myself leaning forward, as if that would help the headlights push through the storm. When the back tires slipped the first time, I cursed under my breath, but kept going. The second slip threw the truck sideways. I lost control before I could correct it. The rear skidded on mud and gravel, and the front dropped into a shallow ditch with a heavy crunch. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried to start it again. Nothing. The rain hammered harder, as if punishing me for every wrong choice that had led me here. There was no cell signal. I tried anyway, raising the phone toward the windshield like a hopeless antenna. The storm swallowed everything. I sat in the dark for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the trees. I thought about my mother waking up and calling my name. I thought about the property lines Dane had tried to redraw. Mostly, I thought about how foolish it was to pretend that breaking one rule would be harmless. When I finally stepped out into the rainwater, hit me so fast and cold that it stole my breath. I pulled my jacket tighter and looked around. The road was empty. The world beyond the headlights was nothing but black. I had one irrational thought. If I screamed, would anyone even hear me out here? That was when I heard the sound of hooves. At first, I thought it was thunder echoing back from the cliff. But the rhythm was too steady, too controlled. A dark shape emerged through the rain, tall and slow-moving, with the kind of calm that seemed impossible in a storm like this. A man on a horse. The horse stepped closer until I could make out its wet coat reflecting the faint beam from my truck. Then the rider lifted his head. Rain rolled off the brim of his hat. He wore an old canvas jacket, soaked and heavy, and his shoulders were broad enough to block half the wind as he approached. He stopped a few feet from me and studied the truck, then studied me with eyes that seemed to hold more silence than the night itself. "You are stuck," he said. His voice was low and steady, as if storms were a normal part of his evening routine. I tried to sound calm when I answered, but my voice shook anyway. I lost control on the curve. "My phone is dead up here." "I know," he replied. "Nothing works on this ridge during weather like this." I glanced at the horse, then back at him, uncertain whether to step back or forward. A stranger on a mountain road at night should have scared me more than the storm, but something in the way he held the reins one-handed kept me from panicking. There was no aggression in him, just an odd kind of quiet. He looked at the truck again, then at me. "You should not be out here alone. The road is closed for a reason." Shame crawled up my neck. "I know. I should not have taken it. I was in a hurry." He considered that answer without judgment. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a wool blanket. "You are soaked. Wrap this around your shoulders. There is a cabin a mile from here. You can stay there until the storm passes." The idea of climbing onto a horse with a stranger in the middle of nowhere should have terrified me. But the cold was sinking into my bones, and my mother's face flashed in my mind. I nodded. "All right." He helped me up behind him, steady and patient, as if he had helped people in storms before. When the horse began to move, he spoke again. "Name is Cole, just Cole." I pressed the blanket closer and whispered my own name. "Mara." He gave a small nod I felt more than saw, and we rode into the night rain pouring over us while I wondered how many rules one person could break in a single evening before the world demanded a price. By the time Cole guided the horse through the last bend of the ridge, the storm felt like a living thing snarling all around us, tearing at the trees and slapping cold sheets of rain across my face. My hands gripped the back of his jacket, not because I trusted him yet, but because I was terrified of slipping off and tumbling down the steep drop into the dark. Cole never faltered. He rode as if storms were nothing more than background noise, as if the world could shake apart, and he would still sit tall in the saddle with his shoulders squared and his gaze steady on the path ahead. When the small cabin came into view, its windows glowing with a faint amber light, I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly weakened my legs. Cole dismounted first, then helped me down with a firm hand that was warm even in the cold rain. He tied the horse to a post beside the porch and opened the cabin door, ushering me in before following with a quiet, steady step. The cabin was small, just one main room with a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow hall that led to a bathroom and what looked like a single bedroom. It was simple, but it felt sturdy and dry and safe, or at least safer than the storm outside. Cole moved without hesitation, stoking the fire, lighting a lantern, and pulling a clean towel from a wooden chest. He handed it to me without a word. I dried my hair with shaking fingers while he knelt by the hearth. Watching him was strange. He had the presence of someone used to hardship, someone who knew how to handle emergencies with a calm that bordered on unsettling. Not once did he ask why I was out alone or what I had been running from. He simply accepted the situation as it was. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even. "You should change out of those wet clothes before you get sick. There is a spare shirt on the hook by the door." I carried the towel and the shirt into the bathroom. The light flickered when I flipped the switch. My reflection in the mirror looked older than I remembered. My hair clung to my cheeks, my eyes were wide with stress, and guilt sat heavy in my chest. I had left my mother alone in the house during a storm, and I had nearly gotten myself killed because I thought the shortcut would save time. When I stepped back out wearing the oversized shirt that smelled faintly of cedar and ash, Cole was stirring something in a small pot over the fire. The steam carried the scent of potatoes, onions, and something earthy I could not place. He ladled the soup into a bowl and set it on the table. "Eat," he said. "Warm food helps after a cold shock." I sat across from him and took a careful sip. It was simple but comforting. Cole worked with the kind of efficiency that suggested he had lived alone a long time. There was no hesitation in the way he moved, no fumbling, no wasted motion. Yet there was nothing practiced or polished either. It was more like he had built a life for himself with quiet routines that made sense only to him. After a while, when the cabin settled into calm and the fire painted warm colors across the wooden walls, I found enough courage to ask the question that had been pushing at me since he first appeared on the road. "You live up here by yourself?" He nodded. "For now. It's isolated. That is the point." I waited for him to say more, but he simply looked into the fire as if the flames were easier to speak to than I was. I wondered if he was hiding from something or someone. His silence did not feel like shyness. It felt chosen, shaped, reinforced, like a wall built piece by piece over a long time. "Thank you for helping me," I said. "I don't know what I would have done out there alone." He gave a small nod. "You would have figured something out. People do when they have to." I almost laughed at that. Cole clearly did not know me well enough to understand that I was hanging on by a thread long before the storm began. I looked down at my hands. I should not have taken that road. and I should not have left my mother alone tonight. That part came out quieter than I meant. Cole studied me for a long moment, not with pity, but with something closer to recognition, almost as if he understood the kind of self-blame that does not need anyone to add to it. Sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong in the moment, he said. Sometimes doing the wrong thing feels like the only option. His voice had a gravity that pulled me in a tone that made it clear he was speaking from experience rather than philosophy. The storm kept roaring outside, but inside the cabin everything felt still. The fire cracked softly, the lantern hummed, and for the first time in months I felt a strange sense of belonging even if I did not understand it. I glanced at him again, taking in the strong lines of his face, the way he held himself stiffly, as if carrying something heavy in the center of his chest. He did not look like a drifter. He did not look like a man wandering aimlessly. He looked like someone who had once stood in a very different place, someone who had lived through storms far worse than the one outside these walls. "Who are you?" I almost asked, but something in his expression stopped me. Whatever his story was, he was not ready to share it, so I let the silence stay. It felt like the respectful thing to do. The storm had faded into a gray drizzle by the time morning crept across the sky, and the world outside the cabin looked washed clean and strangely peaceful. Cole stepped out before me, saddled the horse, and gave me a nod that meant it was time to go. I wrapped the borrowed shirt tighter around myself as we rode down the ridge. The air was cold enough to bite my hands, but not cold enough to distract me from the heaviness in my stomach. Every mile closer to the ranch made my heart beat a little faster. I kept thinking about my mother waking alone in the dark, confused and scared, calling a name no one answered. I kept thinking about the land that had been in my family for 3 generations, and how easily a man with money and ambition could take it away. When we reached the main road, Cole slowed the horse and pointed toward my truck, which still sat crooked in the ditch like a wounded animal. I sighed. It looked exactly the way my life felt. We left it there for the moment and walked the rest of the way on foot, my boots squished in the wet dirt. The closer we got to the ranch, the louder something inside me churned. My front gate was hanging open by the time the house came into view. Not swung open by wind, but pushed open wide. I stopped dead in the muddy path. Cole stepped slightly in front of me without saying a word. That small movement was enough to tell me he had read the situation long before I did. I forced myself to keep walking, even though my knees felt weak. The first thing I noticed was the cypress tree near the driveway. One of its low branches had been snapped clean off and tossed into the yard. The second thing was the shallow mud tracks that cut across the ground in several directions. I had grown up on this land. I knew the difference between a clean tire path and someone driving where they should not. The tracks led toward the barn. My stomach twisted. I hurried ahead, ignoring the way Cole reached an arm out as if trying to hold me back. The barn door was not just open. It had been pried wide, the metal latch bent inward as if someone had kicked it hard. Inside, hay was scattered everywhere, and one of my feed bins was knocked over. One of the ewes in the corner was bleeding in distress, limping on a leg that had not been injured the night before. The sight made something hot and fierce rise in my chest. Who would hurt a harmless animal? Who would break into a small ranch owned by a middle-aged woman who had nothing but a bit of land and a stubborn heart? But I already knew the answer, even before Cole spoke quietly from behind me. Someone wanted to send a message. I closed my eyes for a moment. I did not want to say his name out loud, as if speaking it could make him appear, but the truth pressed against my teeth until it forced its way out. Dane. Cole did not react with surprise. He did not ask who Dane was or what history lay there. He simply took in the barn with a measured gaze, scanning every corner like someone trained to read a scene rather than panic over it. "You should not be here alone," he said, "not while this is happening." The comment hit me harder than it should have. I snapped back without thinking. I have been alone a long time. Part of me regretted it instantly, but Cole did not respond with irritation. He only looked at me the way a quiet man looks at a loud wave, steady and patient. "Being alone is not the same as being safe," he said. I turned away because the truth of that was too sharp. The ewe limped over to me and pressed her head against my leg as if seeking reassurance. I knelt, checked her injury, and whispered a shaky apology into her wool. I should have been here. I should have protected this place. Cole crouched beside me and gently touched the broken latch. Someone forced their way in. They wanted you to see that. I knew he was right. This was not random vandalism. This was fear disguised as a warning. I stood and paced the width of the barn, rubbing my hands together to keep from shaking. Dane and I had ended badly 2 years ago. He had money connections and a future laid out like a golden carpet. I had a small ranch, a sick mother, and years of responsibilities that left little room for becoming the woman he wanted me to be. When I ended it, he told me I would regret choosing dirt and animals over him. He said it with a smile so polished it made my skin crawl. Now he was buying land all across the valley, piece by piece, choking out small ranchers who could not afford legal fights. I was one of the last holdouts on this side of the county. This was no coincidence. I felt the sting of tears and blinked them back hard. Cole watched me from the doorway, leaning slightly to one side like he wanted to step forward but was waiting for permission. When I finally met his gaze, his voice was steady. This man is not just after property. He is after control. He will not stop. I let out a long breath and walked past him into the yard. The rain had softened into a mist, but the cold was settling deep. I hugged my arms around myself. I did not expect you to stay this long, I said without looking at him. You helped me last night. You could have left after that. Another person might have felt accused or dismissed, but Cole did not. He walked toward the fence, examined a muddy boot print, and answered in the same calm voice he had used since the moment we met. I stayed because someone needed to make sure you got home, and because storms do not always end when the rain stops. His words made my chest tighten in a way I did not want to admit. I stood beside him and followed his gaze across the pasture. The land looked bruised like it had been through trauma of its own. Trouble does not always ride on horses or arrive in the dark, he said quietly. Sometimes it walks on 2 feet and wears a friendly smile. I looked at him, searching for something in the way he said that. Maybe experience, maybe warning, maybe both. Whatever it was, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Trouble had arrived, and I was not sure I could face it alone anymore. The sky was already turning the washed-out color of late evening when the last of the chores were done, but the heaviness in the air told me the day was not finished with me yet. I could feel it in the way the wind kept shifting directions, brushing cool and warm currents across my skin as if unsure which season it wanted to belong to. Cole had not said much since examining the tracks near the barn, but I could tell his thoughts were running fast beneath that quiet surface. He moved through the ranch with a steady purpose, checking gate latches, walking the fence line, and studying the ground like someone memorizing a map that only he knew how to read. I fed my mother dinner and settled her into bed early, hoping the medication would keep her resting through the night. She drifted into sleep easily, unaware of the trouble gathering outside her window. There was something strange about the calm that followed. It felt like the kind of silence that comes before a strike. Even the crickets seemed to hush. I tried to distract myself by sweeping the kitchen floor, but the broom felt useless in my hands, and every small sound made me flinch. When the porch boards creaked under Cole's boots, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He paused in the doorway and studied me with that quiet intensity of his. "You should lock up for the night," he said. "Keep a light on in the hall." I nodded, even though his tone made my stomach twist tighter. "Are you expecting something?" I asked it almost in a whisper. He looked out into the darkening yard before answering. "Expecting is the wrong word. Prepared is better." I did not know if that was meant to comfort me or warn me, but either way, the effect was the same. A chill worked its way down my back. After he stepped outside again, I checked the locks on the doors twice, then pulled the curtains tight. The house felt too big and too quiet. I lit an extra lamp in the hallway the way he suggested, then sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea I barely tasted. The minutes ticked by so slowly it felt like time was dragging its feet. I must have drifted into a light doze because the next thing I registered was a sound sharp enough to snap me fully awake. A metallic clank, then another. I sat up straight, trying to locate the direction. The barn. My blood turned cold. I grabbed my phone, even though I knew the service was unreliable out here at night. Then I reached for the rifle that my father had kept mounted above the back door, a tool I rarely touched but had never gotten rid of. I loaded it with trembling fingers. A single flick of the porch light showed nothing out of place, but the sound from the barn came again, louder this time. Metal against wood, something being forced. A voice, low, muffled. Then the horses inside began to scream. I raced out before I had time to think, not even bothering to pull on a coat. Gravel bit into my feet through my shoes as I sprinted across the yard. The barn door was hanging crooked, its latch ripped clean off. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Two shadowy figures moved inside. Another crouched near the back, pulling at the locked gate of one of the stalls. I raised the rifle, but my hands were shaking so violently I was not sure I could aim straight. Before I could decide whether to step inside or call out, a blur of motion came from the side of the barn. Cole. He moved with a speed that startled me even in my panicked state. One of the intruders stepped out from behind a stall, and Cole grabbed him by the front of his jacket and slammed him against a post so hard the man dropped to the ground. The second rushed him with a heavy tool raised in his hand. Cole ducked, twisted, and drove his shoulder into the man's ribs with a precision that told me this was not instinct. This was training. The third intruder tried to escape out the back, but Cole caught him by the arm and swung him down into the dirt. The man groaned and curled into himself. The entire fight lasted maybe 20 seconds, but I felt as if I had been holding my breath for hours. I stepped into the barn, slowly, still gripping the rifle. Cole turned toward me, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. "You all right?" His voice was steady, but the tension in it made my heart race even faster. I nodded, though my knees were shaking. "Are you?" He glanced at his knuckles scraped from the struggle, then shrugged as if it were nothing. "I have had worse." He walked past me and checked the locks on the stalls, calming the horses with a soft murmur. I had never seen him speak to animals before, and something about the gentle tone contrasted so sharply with the power I had just witnessed that it left me almost dizzy. When he finished securing the barn, he turned back to me. "Call the sheriff, now." His command was not loud, but it carried the weight of urgency. I struggled to get my phone to connect, pacing back and forth in the yard until I found a faint signal near the porch. When the deputies finally arrived, Cole stood off to the side, shadowed and distant, as if trying to avoid becoming part of the scene. The intruders were still groaning in the dirt. I answered the questions as best I could, though my voice kept breaking. The deputies took the men into custody and promised to investigate further, but I knew better than to believe this was the end of it. Dane was behind this, and this kind of attack did not stop with one attempt. When the patrol cars left, the ranch fell silent again. The horses quieted, the night cooled, but my hands kept trembling. Cole walked toward me slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp with something I could not name. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," he said quietly. I knew he was right, and I knew that whatever storm had followed him into my life was about to collide with the one already rising around me. The morning after the break-in arrived with a pale sun that brought no warmth and no sense of relief. I woke with the heavy feeling that the night before had not been some strange nightmare, but a clear message that danger had settled itself on my land like an unwanted guest. My mother was still asleep when I checked on her, peaceful and unaware of the chaos outside her world. I stood beside her bed for a long moment, trying to let her calm breathing steady me, but the quiet only made everything inside me feel louder. When I walked outside, Cole was already in the yard. He looked as if he had been awake for hours. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the deep bruises forming on his forearms. He was repairing the barn latch with a focus so intense it made the world around him seem secondary. I hesitated before stepping closer, unsure if I should thank him again, or apologize again, or simply stand near him because the thought of facing the day alone made my chest tighten. Before I could choose, he spoke without looking up. "You should eat something. Your hands are shaking." I looked down and saw he was right. My fingers trembled even though the air was calm. I rubbed them together, embarrassed. "I am fine." His voice stayed steady. "You are not. No one would be fine after last night." The simplicity of that truth made me feel exposed. I watched him work, watched the way he hammered a new bracket into place with measured strength, not rushed or angry or reckless. There was something grounding in the way he moved, something that reminded me of the men who built fences with my father long before I understood how hard a rancher fights to keep land alive. When he finished, he examined the repaired latch, tested it twice, then finally met my gaze. This will hold for now. But the men who came here were not acting on their own. They were sent, you know that. Hearing it spoken aloud made my throat tighten. Dane does not give up easily. Cole studied me for a moment. What happened between you and him? I felt heat rush to my face. The question was simple enough, but the memory of those months with Dane felt like a bruise that had never fully faded. He wanted something I could not give him, more than land, more than a relationship. He wanted to own everything in his life like trophies, and I would have become one of them if I had stayed. Cole nodded, not pressing for more. It should have made me feel relieved, but instead it left me feeling vulnerable. There was something about his quiet acceptance that loosened things inside me I had kept locked for years. We spent the next few hours working through the chores that should have felt routine, but nothing about the day felt normal. Every distant engine made me tense. Every bird call sounded like a warning. Yet through all of that, Cole remained close enough to make sure I was safe without ever making me feel followed or hovered over. When I struggled to lift a feed sack, he took it from me without a word. When my hands shook while fixing a loose hinge, he steadied the board and let me finish it myself. He worked beside me with a kind of respect I was not used to receiving, especially from a man who could clearly take over any task with ease. At midday, we sat on the porch steps with sandwiches neither of us seemed hungry for. Cole watched the pasture in that focused way of his as if danger could step out from behind a fence post at any moment. I watched him instead. "You never told me where you came from," I said finally, "or why you live out here alone." He did not answer right away. His silence was not defensive. It was careful, like he was choosing which truth would do the least harm. "I have my reasons," he said at last. "Reasons that do not need to be yours." His refusal to open up should have frustrated me, and part of me wanted to demand more, but instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because there was a strange comfort in not having to dig for answers he did not want to share. Maybe I understood that kind of guardedness more than I wanted to admit. Still, a quiet fear crept in through the back of my mind. If he could fight like he did last night, if he could read danger the way others read weather, if he carried secrets he refused to speak, then letting him stay near me might be just as dangerous as facing Dane alone. The thought scared me, not because I feared Cole, but because some part of me wanted him to stay. Wanting someone when your life is already falling apart feels like stepping onto thin ice. You know you should turn back, but the stillness ahead looks peaceful enough to make you risk it. After lunch, I went to check the horses while Cole walked the outer fence line again. Dusty, my most stubborn mare, pressed her nose into my shoulder as if sensing how frayed I felt. I buried my face into her neck for a moment and let a quiet tear slip out. I hated that the ranch had become a battleground. I hated that I could not protect it alone. When I looked up, Cole was standing at the barn door, watching me with an expression I could not decipher. He approached slowly, careful not to interrupt whatever moment he thought he had stepped into. "You care about this place," he said softly. "Too much sometimes." "It is not too much," he replied. "It is the right amount, and that is what makes people like him target you." His words struck an ache deep inside me. I turned away, brushing my hand over Dusty's mane. "What am I supposed to do, Cole? I cannot leave. I cannot fight him in court forever, and I cannot watch everything my father built get taken apart piece by piece." Cole stepped into the stall beside me and leaned on the gate. "You do not have to fight alone, not anymore." Those 6 quiet words unsettled me more than danger ever had, because the comfort they offered was not a warm blanket or a safe room or a temporary shield. It was something deeper. Something that asked for a kind of trust I was not sure I knew how to give. And the truth that scared me most was this: I already wanted to give it. For the next 2 days, the ranch settled into a fragile rhythm, the kind that feels steady on the surface, but trembles underneath if you listen closely enough. Cole stayed without being asked, moving through each part of the ranch as if he had lived there far longer than a few nights. He fixed loose boards on the porch, strengthened the gate hinges, and checked the water lines before dawn like someone who understood the quiet ways a ranch could fail. I tried not to watch him too closely, but it was impossible not to notice the way he carried himself, every motion measured, every glance purposeful, as if his mind never rested even when his body looked relaxed. He was comfortable in the silence, comfortable in the work, comfortable in the shadows. Too comfortable. That was the first sign that something about him did not belong to the life he pretended to be living. On the third morning, I found him at the old tool shed sorting through rusted nails and coiled ropes like he was looking for something specific. The shed smelled of dust and cedar and memories I had tried not to think about for years. My father used to keep his most important tools in there, the ones he trusted no one else to touch. Cole glanced over his shoulder when he heard me. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it that made me pause. "What are you looking for?" He straightened slowly, wiping dust off his hands. "Something to reinforce the back fence. Something heavy-duty." I frowned. "There is nothing in here worth using. Most of it is old." He nodded once but did not move away. Instead, he stepped to the side, revealing a small wooden crate half hidden behind a stack of feed buckets. I stared at it. I had not seen it in years. My father always kept that crate locked with a padlock he never let me touch. I had never found the key after he passed. Cole knelt and tapped the lid with his knuckles. This one was already open when I came in. That should have been impossible. My chest tightened. I crouched beside him and touched the latch. It had been pried open. Not recently, not cleanly. Someone had forced it. A cold ripple worked through me. I did not want to look inside, but my hands moved anyway. Beneath the layer of spider webs and debris lay a metal box I had never seen before. Square. Heavy. Scuffed at the corners. There was no reason for it to be there. No memory to explain it. Cole rested one hand on the floorboards and watched me carefully. "You do not have to open it," he said. But I had spent my whole life on this land. If there was something hidden in my father's shed, I needed to know why. I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, were objects that did not belong to any ranch life I understood. A fixed blade knife in a black sheath. A small radio with a frequency dial that looked military grade. A set of heavy gloves more suited for tactical work than farm chores. And beneath all of that, a folded map with markings along the ridges and creek beds behind my property. My breath caught. Why would my father have had any of this? Why would someone hide it here? Then I noticed the tag on one of the gloves. The initials were not my father's. They were C.H. Cole exhaled softly in a way that made my heart bang against my ribs. I stood up too quickly, stumbling backward. "These are yours, aren't they?" He rose slowly, not reaching for me, not defending himself, not offering excuses. His silence was louder than any confession. I stepped farther back. "You told me you were just passing through. You told me you kept to yourself." "I did not lie," he said quietly. "I just did not tell you the rest." My pulse roared in my ears. I pointed to the map. "This is a surveillance layout. This is not ranch work. This is not something a wandering cowboy would carry." Cole held my gaze steady and unflinching. "There are things about my past that would not help you to know. Things that would only make you afraid." The words sliced through me. Afraid. I thought about the fight in the barn, the way he moved like someone trained not to defend himself but to neutralize threats. I thought about the way he scanned every horizon as if expecting something to emerge at any moment. I thought about the way he avoided the spotlight when the deputies came. My voice cracked. "What are you running from?" He inhaled slowly as if trying to decide how much truth he could give without revealing the parts he had locked away. "I am not running. I am staying off the grid. There is a difference." I laughed, but it was not a sound I recognized. "Off the grid? You think that sounds less terrifying." Cole stepped toward me, stopping just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, even though the morning air was cold. "I would never hurt you, Mara. I know that is not enough, but it is the only truth I can say without dragging you into something that has already cost too many people too much." My throat tightened painfully. "Were you a soldier? Were you law enforcement? Were you something else?" He closed his eyes for a brief moment. I was someone who made mistakes, someone who trusted the wrong people, someone who lost more than he could afford to lose. That was all he offered, and somehow it made everything worse, because the softness in his voice was not the softness of a liar. It was the softness of a man who had been broken by something he believed he deserved. I felt myself pulling back inch by inch, even though part of me wanted to step forward. He saw the distance growing and did nothing to stop it. That was the first crack in his wall, and it was also the moment the ground beneath my feet began to change, shifting in ways I did not understand yet. I did not know if Cole was the safest person in my world or the most dangerous. I only knew that nothing about him was simple, and nothing about me was ready for the truth. Not yet. 2 days passed after I found the box in the shed, and every hour felt strange and stretched as if the ranch and the sky and even my own breath were waiting for something to break. Cole hardly spoke unless he needed to. He stayed close, but not close enough to be in my space, working on the fence line, repairing a sagging post, hauling feed, sharpening tools, moving with that silent purpose that had once brought me comfort and now only reminded me that I did not know who he really was. I kept telling myself that I would wait until things calmed down before confronting him again, that I would let my mind settle and my heart stop racing before demanding more answers. But fear and curiosity have sharp edges, and mine cut deeper with every passing hour. On the third afternoon, I went looking for extra blankets in the loft of the barn, trying to prepare for a cold front the radio said was coming. I climbed the old wooden ladder, brushing away cobwebs that clung to the beams, and pushed aside a stack of folded tarps my father had stored years ago. Something metallic glinted beneath them. My stomach tightened. I lifted the tarps and uncovered a small lockbox, dusty and dented with a rusted clasp that looked as though someone had opened it before. My hands trembled as I unlatched it. Inside were documents neatly folded and bound in a thick rubber band. I pulled them out and sat cross-legged on the loft floor, dust drifting around me like ash. The first page was a deed for thousands of acres of land in another state. The second was a bank authorization listing a trust in a name I recognized from the gloves in the shed. Cole Hartwell. My chest constricted. I kept going. Articles clipped from newspapers all dated several years back. A collapse at an energy site. 14 workers trapped and killed, a leadership scandal, a CEO who stepped down under pressure, then vanished. A photograph was tucked among the pages. Cole Younger, cleaner cut, wearing a tailored suit and standing in front of a large company sign. Hartwell Energy. He was the missing executive the news had speculated about for months. The one who walked away from an empire. The one people said had disappeared to escape guilt or scandal or grief, depending on which article you believed. My breath came too fast. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady myself, but the room kept tilting. I had let a stranger into my home. A stranger who could fight off 3 men in the dark. A stranger who carried tactical gear and maps of my land. A stranger who had once been a powerful man with resources I could not even imagine. And he had let me believe he was a quiet drifter, a cowboy passing through, a man with a simple life. The betrayal hit hard, not because he owed me anything, but because I had trusted him without realizing how much trust I was giving. I slipped the documents back into the lockbox, climbed down the ladder with trembling steps, and headed toward the pasture where I knew Cole would be. He was by the far fence, checking a loose post, the late afternoon sun catching the edges of his hair and giving him an almost peaceful silhouette. Anger and fear twisted together in my chest. I kept walking until he looked up, reading something in my face before I said a word. "You found something," he said quietly. I held out the folder of documents, my hand shaking. "Who are you?" His jaw tensed slightly, but he did not step forward or back. He simply watched me, watched the way my breath shook, watched the betrayal written across my face. I opened the folder and pulled out the newspaper clipping with his photograph. "This is you. You are him. The CEO who disappeared. The one who left after that collapse. You are not Cole Harper. You are Cole Hartwell." He closed his eyes for a brief second, like the truth itself was a blow he had been preparing for but still felt. When he opened them, his voice was quiet. "I never told you my full name, but I never lied about who I was in front of you." My laugh came out raw and strained. "That is supposed to mean something. You let me think you were some lonely drifter, some quiet ranch hand passing through. You knew what I thought, you knew what I believed, and you let me believe it." He looked down at the earth between us. I did, because I came here to disappear, not to rebuild a past I was trying to bury. I shook my head, tears blurring my sight. "You should have told me the truth. You should have trusted me enough to let me choose whether to let you stay." He studied me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something like sorrow, something that made my anger wobble for a moment before rising again. "Mara," he said softly, "I lost 14 people that night. Fathers, sons, brothers. I signed the order that sent them into that tunnel. I trusted a system that failed them, and when the world wanted someone to blame, I handed myself over. Whether I deserved it or not, I stepped back as if the air between us had turned too hot to breathe. You could have told me." He shook his head. "No, because the moment people know who I was, I stop being a man and I become a symbol, a mistake, a headline, and I could not let that happen here. Not with you, especially not with you." His voice softened on the last words, but I could not hold on to the tenderness hidden inside them. I felt foolish, exposed, used. I pushed the documents against his chest and let my hand fall away. "I do not know who you are." "Not really. And I do not know what else you are hiding." I turned before he could answer, before the weight of his silence could pull me back. I walked across the pasture with my vision blurring and my pulse thundering. Behind me, I heard him take a single step, then stop, as if he knew chasing me would only make everything worse. That was the moment his past stood in front of me, and I realized I was no longer sure whether he was the safest man I had met or the most dangerous truth I would ever uncover. I left him standing in the pasture, the folder still in his hands, the truth hanging between us like a storm cloud waiting to break open again, and even as I walked away, I felt the sharp ache in my chest that comes when trust cracks down the middle. I did not stop or look back. I went straight into the house, locked the door behind me, and pressed my back against it until my breathing slowed enough to keep me upright. My mother was humming in her room, lost in a memory I could not reach, unaware that everything in my world had shifted again. I envied her for a moment. Forgetting can be a mercy. Remembering never is. The days that followed felt like moving through thick fog. Cole kept his distance, staying on the far side of the property where I rarely saw him, and I forced myself to pretend I preferred it that way, even though every morning I found myself glancing out the window to see if he was still there. I did not want to need him. I did not want to want him. But losing the illusion of who I thought he was did not erase the part of me that had begun to rely on him. I pushed that thought away. There were bigger problems closing in. On Wednesday, a white county vehicle pulled into my driveway, a man in a reflective vest stepping out with a clipboard in his hand and an expression that told me he was accustomed to delivering bad news. "Morning, Ms. Caldwell," he said. "We received a complaint regarding your water line runoff and some concerns about fencing violations on the south boundary." I stared at him. That boundary had been fine for years. Nothing had changed except Dane stepping back into my life like a poison spreading through water. I followed the inspector around the property, answering questions through clenched teeth, watching him take photos of things that had never mattered before. When he left, he handed me 2 notices and a warning that the county would be back soon. As his truck disappeared down the road, I sank onto the porch steps and let my head fall into my hands. The pressure on me was no longer subtle. It was a chokehold, tightening a little more each day. The next blow landed the following morning when my lawyer called to say that Dane had filed his 3rd petition to acquire a strip of my land for an access road. This one came with signatures from 2 neighboring landowners who had never had issues until now. "People have been talking," my lawyer said. "They are saying you cannot maintain the property alone, that you have had break-ins, that the ranch is unsafe. Unsafe. That word hit me harder than all the others. If the county decided the ranch posed a risk, they could seize portions of it through forced development. My father's land, my mother's home, my last piece of solid ground in a life that felt like quicksand. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. Later that day, while checking the feed bins behind the barn, I heard footsteps crunching gravel. I stiffened, ready to run or fight or call for help, but when I turned, Dane was standing 10 feet away with his hands tucked casually in his pockets, smiling like he owned the place. "You look tired, Mara," he said. "This place is wearing you down, and there is no shame in admitting that." My pulse thudded painfully. "Get off my property." He took a step closer, ignoring the command. "You know, when we were together, I always admired how hard you tried to do everything yourself. But some land is too much for one person. You need support. You need someone with resources. Someone like me." Rage flared through me. All of this, the break-in, the county notices, the petitions, it is you. His smile widened in a way that made my skin crawl. "I am doing what is necessary. Progress requires tough decisions. Besides, your ranch is worth more as part of my project than it will ever be under your care." My hands clenched at my sides. My voice shook. "My father built this place with his bare hands. It is not yours to take." Dane sighed as if I were being difficult. "Sentiment is sweet, Mara, but it does not pay for repairs or inspections or the round-the-clock supervision your mother needs." I froze. He saw the fear cross my face and leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think the county will ignore the fact that she wanders at night sometimes, or that you leave her alone for hours, or that you have someone living on the property who you know nothing about." My breath hitched. He knew about Cole. He knew more than he should. Something in my face must have given him the reaction he wanted because his smile sharpened. "Yes, I know about him. And you should be careful. Lonely women make foolish choices when they are desperate." Heat flooded my face, humiliation and anger twisting together until I could barely see. "Leave," I said again. "Now." Dane straightened, brushing invisible dust from his shirt. "Think about my offer. It will not stay on the table forever." Then he turned and walked away like a man confident he had already won. When he disappeared down the driveway, my legs gave out, and I sank into the dirt. I felt small, cornered, powerless. Everything Cole had warned me about was coming true, and I had pushed him away when I needed him most. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the weight of it all pressed down until I could barely breathe. I went into the house, checked on my mother, and sat beside her as she slept, holding her hand because it was the only thing that felt steady in a world crumbling around me. The ranch creaked and settled in the night air, tired and aging, much like I felt. And somewhere in the dark outside, I knew Cole was still on the property. But between us now stood a wall built of secrets, fear, and the painful truth that sometimes the person you need most is the same person you are most afraid to trust. The morning after Dane's visit, I woke with the kind of heaviness that does not lift no matter how much coffee you drink or how long you stand at the window trying to convince yourself the world outside has not changed. My mother slept late, her breathing soft and steady, unaware that our lives were being pulled apart, thread by thread. I stood in the hallway with my hands braced against the wall, feeling the house tilt under the weight of everything I had tried to hold together. I could not keep her safe alone. I could not keep the ranch afloat alone. And as much as I hated admitting it, I could not fight Dane alone. The decision pressed into me with painful clarity. I needed help, not the kind that came with contracts or threats or a polished smile hiding a wolf. I needed help from someone who had already fought battles bigger than mine, and there was only one person like that on my land. I stepped outside into the cool gray morning, the grass damp beneath my boots, the sky a dull sheet of cloud that seemed to mirror my thoughts. I did not know where Cole would be. He had spent the last 2 days keeping his distance, giving me space, pretending not to watch me from the far side of the property. But I knew him well enough by now to guess he would be working. Work had become his way of staying close without crossing the line I had drawn. So I headed toward the pasture. I found him near the fence line, tightening wire with steady hands, the cold morning breeze shifting his hair. He did not look up at first, but something in the air must have changed because he straightened slowly and turned toward me. His expression stayed unreadable, but his eyes held that quiet awareness I had come to recognize, the kind that saw far more than I ever intended to reveal. I stopped a few feet away, my breath clouding between us. I did not know how to begin. Words felt sharp in my mouth, too brittle to shape into anything meaningful. He waited, not impatient, not expectant, just steady in a way that made the moment feel both terrifying and strangely safe. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "I need your help," I said, my voice barely louder than the wind. The silence between us shifted. Cole set down the tool in his hand and stepped closer just enough to show he had heard the part of my voice I could not hide. "Tell me what happened." "Dane came here yesterday. He threatened me. He threatened the ranch. He hinted at calling the county on my mother." My voice cracked as I said her name. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, a mix of anger and something protective he did not try to hide. What exactly did he say? Enough. Enough to make it clear he will not stop. Enough to make it clear he knows things he should not know. Like you being here. Cole held my gaze with a stillness that felt like a hand around my spine, steadying me. "He knows my name, or he knows enough to guess who you might have been." It was not a question. It was a realization. His jaw tightened. "Mara," he said quietly, "anyone with money and a motive can dig up parts of a person's past. Dane is not the type to let a mystery sit still." I swallowed hard. It hurt to admit what came next. I cannot fight him on my own. Not anymore. I waited for him to respond, to step back, to remind me that I was the one who had pushed him away, the one who had told him I did not know who he was. But he did none of that. He moved closer, slow enough to let me withdraw if I wanted to. I did not. I watched the way his breath stirred in the cold air, watched the tension in his shoulders ease just slightly as he spoke. "I told you before, you do not have to fight alone. Not with me here." The relief that washed through me came so fast it made my knees weak, but beneath it there was guilt too, a guilt that took shape in 4 words. "I walked away from you." Cole shook his head, his voice steady. "You walked away from a truth you were not ready for. That is not the same thing." Something in my chest loosened, the anger, the fear, the confusion. It all softened in the warmth of his calm. I took a slow breath. "So, what do we do now?" Cole bent down, picked up the tool he had dropped, then wiped the dirt from his hands as if preparing for a long conversation. "We start by gathering proof. What Dane did last night. What he has been doing to other ranchers. Everything he can no longer deny." I nodded, my heartbeat picking up. "And then, we use it. We use every piece of it. We go to the county, to the state board, to whoever needs to see it. But we do it on our terms, not his." I felt something deep inside me shift, like a door I had kept shut finally opening. "You would really help me do this." He looked at me, then fully, without the guarded distance he usually kept. "I am not going anywhere, Mara. Not now. Not when you are up against a man who thinks fear can win. Not when you think you need to do this alone." The wind swept across the pasture, carrying the faint smell of earth and cold grass. I realized I had been holding my breath for several seconds. When I exhaled, the weight on my chest eased just enough for me to breathe normally again. "Thank you," I whispered. His expression softened in a way that made something in my stomach turn over. "You do not need to thank me. You just need to be ready." Ready for what? The truth, the fight, all of it. I took another breath, steadier this time. "I am ready." For the first time in weeks, I meant it. Cole nodded once, firm and certain, as if sealing an agreement that carried more weight than the words alone. Then he motioned for me to follow him toward the barn. "Come on, we have work to do." As we walked side by side, the ranch no longer felt like the place where everything was falling apart. It felt like the place where we would make our stand. And maybe for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that with Cole beside me, I might actually win. The night it happened, the air felt strange, sharp, almost metallic, the kind of cold that wraps around your ribs and warns you something is coming long before you see it. Cole and I had spent the entire day gathering documents from the shed, organizing files, printing old emails he had saved, and calling 2 ranchers he trusted who had faced pressure from Dane months before. By the time the sun dipped low, we had enough evidence to make anyone nervous. Enough to bury Dane if the law played fair. But men like Dane rarely let things reach a courtroom. I should have sensed it earlier, should have understood why the silence felt heavy and why the dogs refused to leave the porch. Cole sensed it. I could see it in the way he moved around the house that evening, checking windows, twice lingering near doorframes, listening harder than usual. At one point, he stopped mid-step, head tilted, eyes narrowing at a sound I could not hear. "What is it?" I whispered. He shook his head slightly. "Not sure yet, but stay close." I told myself not to panic, that we were imagining threats because we had spent the whole day dealing with them. But when darkness settled over the ranch like a thick blanket, the feeling only grew worse. My mother had gone to bed early, leaving me and Cole in the kitchen, with paperwork spread across the table. He leaned over a map, tracing property lines with the tip of his finger. If Dane pushes for emergency access again, this is the route he will use. There is only one way for him to claim it legally. I folded my arms tightly. He does not care about legal. Cole looked up slowly, the truth in my voice settling into his eyes. No, he does not. Before I could say more, the sudden sound of engines cut through the stillness, low and steady, growing louder as they rolled over the gravel road leading to the ranch. My stomach dropped. Cole was already moving. "Lights off," he murmured. "Now!" I rushed to the wall switch and flicked it down, plunging the kitchen into darkness. My pulse thudded in my ears as headlights swept across the side of the house, sharp beams slicing through the night. There were 3 trucks, maybe 4. Doors slammed. Male voices murmured. Boots hit the ground with purpose. Cole moved to the hallway and handed me the walkie he kept clipped to his belt. "Go to your mother's room. Stay behind the bed. Call Sheriff Lanning. Tell him everything." I did not move. "You cannot go out there alone." His expression was calm but fierce. "I need you safe. Please." It was the please that broke me. I nodded and darted down the hall, heart hammering. I reached my mother's room just as the first heavy knock slammed against the front door. It echoed through the house like a blow. "Open up! We know you are in there!" My mother stirred in her bed, confused. "Mara, what is happening?" I placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. "Just stay down, Mama. Stay very still." I crouched beside the bed and raised the walkie to my mouth. "Sheriff Lanning. Emergency. This is Mara Caldwell. Men on my property. Armed. This is an attack. Please send help." Static answered me. Then a voice crackled through. "Understood. Stay where you are. Units en route. Hold tight, Mara. Hold tight." The knocking stopped. A cold quiet followed, then a crash as the front door splintered inward. Wood cracked. Voices shouted, "Move! Find him! Find her!" My mother gasped. I pressed her hand gently. "It is okay. It is okay." But I did not believe it. From the hallway I heard heavy footsteps, then another sound, a quiet thud, a muffled curse, then silence, long silence, then a single voice. Dane's voice. "Cole, come on out. I know you are here. You want to finish what you started." My blood froze. What he started? What had Cole started? What history did they share that I had not yet learned? I clenched the walkie in my hand, ready to speak, ready to scream for Cole not to move, but before I could, another voice came from outside the room. "No. You want me. You come get me. Cole." His voice was steady cold, edged with something dangerous, something controlled. I could hear him moving farther away from the house, drawing Dane and his men out into the yard, buying us time, protecting us. Again. I crawled to the doorway of my mother's bedroom, staying low, and peered toward the front windows. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. Cole stood in the middle of the yard, the porch light behind him outlining his figure like a shadow cut from iron. Dane and 6 men faced him, some holding guns, others carrying crowbars and chains. The barrels glinted under the moonlight. Dane smirked, stepping forward. "You should have stayed gone." Cole answered with a voice that sent chills through me. "You should have stayed away from her." Everything exploded at once. A shot cracked into the night. Horses screamed from the barn. My mother covered her ears with a cry. I reached for her, pulling her down to the floor as more shots lit up the darkness. I did not know who fired first. I only knew that Cole moved like lightning, a shadow, a force, a storm of precision and instinct. He charged one man, disarming him with a single brutal motion, then used the weapon to knock down the man beside him. Dane shouted orders. Another gun fired. Cole spun away, rolled behind the trough, and returned fire with a short burst that sent two men diving for cover. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to drag him inside and hold him safe. But I also knew that without him, we would not survive the night. Sirens wailed in the distance, at last growing louder, but not fast enough. Dane cursed, grabbed the nearest man by the collar, and shouted toward the darkness. "This is not over, Hartwell. Not even close." He fired one last shot toward the house before scrambling into the truck. Engines roared, tires spun, and then they were gone, swallowed by the night road, just moments before the sheriff cars tore into the driveway with lights blazing. I crawled to the door, shaking. Cole stood in the yard, blood on his shirt, his breath ragged but still standing, still alive. When he saw me, something raw and unguarded flickered across his face. Relief, worry, something deeper I could not name yet. I stepped out onto the porch, my legs unsteady. "Cole, are you hurt?" He looked at me for a long moment, then back at the dark road where Dane had vanished, and his voice came out low with certainty. "Not enough to stop me." The sheriff cars filled the yard with spinning red and blue lights that washed over the broken porch. The shattered front door, the scattered shell casings, and Cole standing in the center of it all with blood running down his arm and dirt streaked across his jaw like war paint. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open with a force I could not contain. Officers rushed past me, spreading across the property, checking the barn, checking the yard, shouting into radios, but all I could see was him, Cole, alive, hurt, breathing, standing tall as if he had fought off the darkness itself to keep me safe, and maybe he had. Sheriff Lanning strode toward him, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. "You want to tell me what happened here?" Cole wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of blood. "Men hired by Dane Easton came onto the property armed. They forced entry. They opened fire. I defended myself and the people inside that house." The sheriff stared at him. "That is a heavy accusation. You have witnesses." Cole nodded toward me without looking. "Her. And my mother," I whispered, still shaking. "They came in shooting. They were going to drag Cole out or kill him or maybe kill both of us. They said his name. They called him Hartwell." Several deputies turned their heads at that. The sheriff stilled. "Hartwell. As in Cole Hartwell." Cole said nothing. He just met the sheriff's eyes with the kind of steady defiance only a man who had survived too much could carry. The sheriff exhaled slowly like a man who had just confirmed a rumor he never wanted to see true. "My God," he murmured. "It is you." For several long seconds the world seemed to pause. The lights spinning silently, the wind holding its breath, the officers waiting for their orders. Then Sheriff Lanning stepped closer. "You disappeared years ago. People thought you fled the country. Or worse." Cole answered with a voice that held no apology. "I came here." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "Does this feud between you and Dane go back to the collapse? Because if it does, this whole county is sitting on a powder keg about to go off." Before Cole could answer, I stepped forward, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the chaos. "This is my land, my family home. My mother sleeps inside and forgets her name some nights. Dane has been pressuring ranchers for months and harassing me for longer. Tonight he came here with guns because he thinks everything in this valley is his for the taking. Cole did nothing wrong except protect us." The sheriff looked at me with something softening in his expression. "Mara, I know Dane has been pushing boundaries, but armed assault, breaking into a house, this is a whole different level. It is attempted murder. Of you and Cole." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes." The sheriff turned to his men. "Collect every casing, photograph every footprint. I want evidence of every shot taken. And get a medic over here. We have blood on the ground." Cole shook his head. "I am fine." The sheriff gave him a look that said arguing would not work. "Sit down before you fall down." Cole hesitated, looked at me, and then finally lowered himself to the porch steps. The medic knelt beside him and started cleaning the gash on his arm. I moved closer, unable to stop myself, unable to keep distance anymore now that the truth had torn everything else open. I knelt beside him, my hands shaking as I reached toward him. He looked up at me with eyes that held more exhaustion and more tenderness than I had ever seen on anyone, and something inside me snapped free. "You could have died," I whispered. "You almost died out there." He reached out with his good hand and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, his touch gentle in a way that made my breath hitch. "I told you, Mara. I am not going anywhere. Not without making sure you and your mother are safe." His words hit deeper than he knew, maybe deeper than he intended. The medic wrapped his arm, murmuring instructions, but I barely heard him. My focus was on the man in front of me, the man who had fought for us again and again, the man whose past terrified me, but whose presence had become the only thing keeping me sane. When the medic moved away, Cole exhaled slowly and rested his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. He looked worn down, carved by pain and memory. For the first time, I did not see the mystery or the danger or the man hiding from the world. I saw the man who stayed, the man who fought, the man who tried to disappear because the weight he carried was too heavy for one life. I touched his shoulder gently. "Cole." He lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine with a vulnerability I had never seen in him. "Cole Hartwell." I said softly, the full name, tasting like truth and fear and something new, something brave. He froze, the sound of it striking something deep inside him. No one had spoken that name to him in years. He swallowed hard. "You do not have to call me that." "But I do," I whispered, "because it is you, all of you, and I am done pretending I do not care." His breath caught. "Mara." I shook my head before he could speak, before fear could build in my chest again. "You fought for me tonight. You fought for my mother. You fought for this land, and you did it even after I walked away from you. I do not understand everything yet. I do not know the whole story, but I know this. I trust you. I trust the man standing in front of me right now." His eyes closed for a moment like my words were something too heavy or too precious to hold. When they opened again, there was a warmth there I had never seen, a warmth that made the world tilt. He reached for my hand slowly, carefully, as if giving me a chance to pull away. I did not. When his fingers closed around mine, the rest of the world faded. The sheriff, the flashing lights, the scattered shell casings, all of it blurred into nothing. It was just me and Cole. Just Mara and the man who had tried to leave his past behind, but could not outrun it. The man who had somehow become the only place my heart felt steady. "Mara," he whispered, his voice low, his hand warm around mine. "You have no idea what it means to hear you say my name again." But I did, because saying it out loud had changed something inside me. Cole Hartwell. The name I feared, the name I trusted, the name I spoke out loud because I knew with trembling certainty that I did not want to imagine a life without him. The days that followed the attack unfolded in a blur of sheriff visits, witness statements, paperwork, and long conversations with lawyers who finally took the threat seriously once bullets had lodged themselves in the siding of my home. Dane vanished for 72 hours, long enough to make the deputies nervous and the county board jittery, but not long enough for me to feel safe. I barely slept. Neither did Cole. He stayed on the property every night, sometimes sitting on the porch with a flashlight in hand, sometimes walking the fence line in the early hours of the morning, sometimes leaning against the barn door as if guarding the whole world by himself. My mother sensed the tension, but did not understand it. She asked me several times why there were police cars on the road, why Cole had a bandage on his arm, why I looked tired, and each time I told her a version of the story that would not break her heart or twist her already fragile memories. Through it all, Cole stood beside me, steady as a rooted tree, quieter than usual, more thoughtful but present. He never left the ranch, not once. On the fourth morning, just as the sun pushed pale gold across the pasture, Sheriff Lanning pulled into the driveway with a look on his face that made my stomach tighten. Cole and I stepped out onto the porch, bracing ourselves for more bad news. Instead, the sheriff held up a thin folder. "We got him," he said. "Dane is in custody. His men talked, every last one of them. Assault, armed trespass, illegal weapons conspiracy to intimidate landowners. It is all sticking. He will not be walking free for a very long time." Relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. My hands shook in my lap as I whispered a thank you I barely had the strength to say. Cole exhaled beside me, a long, slow breath that seemed to release months of tension. He looked at me in a way that made my heart ache, as if he had been holding the world still with his bare hands and could finally let go. The sheriff nodded toward Cole. "You will both need to give full statements again, but the case is strong. Very strong. After everything that happened, I think you just changed the entire power balance in this county." Cole gave a quiet nod. "We did it together." The sheriff left shortly after leaving us on the porch with the sound of wind and birds and a silence that no longer felt threatening. For the first time in weeks, the ranch breathed easy. I turned toward Cole, really seeing him, the exhaustion in the slope of his shoulders, the lingering worry in his eyes, and the fierce gentleness he had shown me again and again. He looked down at his bandaged arm and then back up at me. "What now?" he asked softly. I stared at the morning light stretching across the grass, warm and soft, touching everything it could reach. "Now we breathe," I said, "and we figure out what comes next." The words felt big and small all at once. Cole stepped closer. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if asking permission without speaking, and when I did not move away, he reached up and touched my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across my skin. The world narrowed to that single gesture. "You know," he murmured, "there was a time when I thought I did not deserve to stand in a place like this again. A place with hope. A place with someone who sees me." My throat tightened. "Cole!" He shook his head gently. "Let me say this. I spent years trying to outrun my past, trying to disappear into shadows so I did not have to face what I had lost. I never thought I would find something worth standing still for again. But I found it here. With you." My breath trembled as I answered. "I am not perfect either. I broke too. I ran too. I lost parts of myself I did not think I would ever get back. But when you were here, when you fought for us, when you stayed, even after I pushed you away, something inside me stopped running." Cole stepped closer until our foreheads almost touched. "Mara," he whispered, "you are the one place I have ever felt whole." The confession wrapped around me with a warmth that reached places inside me I had forgotten existed. I leaned into him just enough that my breath mingled with his. Then, "Stay," I whispered. "Stay here. Stay with me." His answer was immediate and certain. "I will." The first real moment of peace washed over us like warm light, dissolving the last pieces of fear lingering in the corners of my heart. That evening, the sky turned a soft rose gold, the air warm, the hills glowing like they had been waiting for this ending all along. We sat together by the pasture fence, watching the horses graze while my mother hummed on the porch and the last of the deputies drove away. Cole rested his hand lightly over mine, our fingers intertwining without hesitation. The world felt steady again, not because danger had vanished, but because we were no longer fighting alone. Weeks passed. Dane's case grew stronger. The community rallied around us. Old neighbors brought food and supplies. Ranchers, once afraid to speak, now stood beside us with firm voices and determined hearts. And slowly, the ranch began to feel like home again. Not just inherited land or responsibility or weight on my shoulders, but home. Real home. One quiet evening, Cole walked toward me from the barn with a small wooden box in his hand. It was not velvet or polished or fancy, just simple and honest like everything about him. My heart stuttered as he stopped in front of me. "Mara," he said, his voice warm, steady, beautiful in its sincerity. "I do not want to disappear anymore. I want to stay. I want to build something that lasts. With you." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, silver and hand-worked, etched with a pattern that looked like the ridges behind our house. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. Cole. He took my hand in his and whispered words that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I love you, not for saving me, not for needing me, but for seeing me, really seeing me. I felt tears gather in my eyes as I answered through a shaky breath. I love you too. And as he slid the ring onto my finger, the world seemed to shift into something brighter, gentler, truer. The fear, the past, the pain. All of it softened beneath the glow of a future built on courage and honesty, and the quiet way two broken hearts can find their way back to life when they choose each other without doubt. The sun dipped behind the hills in a wash of gold and lavender. Cole pulled me close, his forehead touching mine, his breath warm against my skin. And for the first time in a very long time, everything turned to light. There are moments in life when a story is no longer just a story. When the journey you have watched unfold on the screen begins to echo pieces of your own heart, and as you sit here with the last traces of Mara and Cole still lingering in your mind, I want to invite you to take one more breath with me, one more quiet moment to let the truth of their journey settle into the soft place where memory and hope meet. Because maybe you have been where they were. Maybe you have loved someone you did not fully understand. Maybe you have been hurt by someone you once trusted. Maybe you have stood in the wreckage of your life, wondering if anything good could rise again from the dust. Or maybe you have been the one who walked away from the world carrying guilt or heartbreak or silence on your shoulders, believing you had nothing left to give. And yet here you are, listening to a story that dared to tell you the opposite. A story that whispered gently that even broken hearts can find their way back to light if they are brave enough to reach for it. If you felt your own pulse quicken when danger crept toward the ranch, or your own breath tremble when Mara whispered Cole's name, like it was a fragile truth finally spoken aloud, or your own chest tighten with relief when dawn came over the hills and fear loosened its grip, then you know this was more than entertainment. This was a reminder that healing often comes in the quiet choices we make every day, the choice to stand up when life knocks us down, the choice to trust when our past tells us to hide, the choice to believe that love is still waiting somewhere, even when the world has tried to convince us otherwise. Maybe tonight you needed that reminder. Maybe you needed to see what it looks like when two people who have every reason to give up instead choose to stay. Maybe you needed to feel that surge of hope as the darkness lifted and two weary souls stepped into a future brighter than the past they survived. And if this story stirred something inside you, if it touched you in ways you did not expect, if it left you thinking about your own life or your own second chances, then I want to invite you to stay with us, because this is what we do here. We tell stories that remind people they are not alone. Stories that hold the fragile places of life with tenderness and courage. Stories that honor the battles you have fought and celebrate the strength it took to keep going. At Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in the power of redemption. We believe in the quiet resilience of the human heart. We believe that no matter where you are right now, no matter what you have been through, there is still time for something good to grow again. And if tonight reminded you of that, even a little, then I hope you will join our community by tapping subscribe and turning on the notification bell. Not because the algorithm demands it, but because somewhere out there is another story waiting for you. Another journey that might comfort your soul, or make you feel understood, or give you the courage to face what comes next. And maybe you know someone who needs this. Someone who carries a weight they rarely speak about, someone who has been trying to hold their world together alone for far too long. If you do, I hope you will share this story with them. You never know how far a little light can reach. Thank you for spending this time with me, for opening your heart to Mara and Cole, for letting their story walk beside you for a little while. Remember this: it is never too late to begin again. It is never too late to forgive yourself. It is never too late to love or trust or rebuild or hope. And it is never too late to believe that somewhere beyond the mountains of your own fear, the sun is already rising. Stay with us. Your next story is waiting.